It is an honor and a privilege to be asked to speak here today. From the moment that the Truth in Action group asked me if I would share a little bit today, I knew that if I said yes, I would be opening up my heart and my soul to the city of Morden in a way that I have never done before. I've spent weeks trying to decide what to share with you folks here today. For those of you who know me, and probably even some of you that don't, finding the words to express myself on topics that I feel really deeply isn't hard for me. I've been known to go on a rant or two sometimes when I'm really fired up about something. But when you're talking about truth and reconciliation, sometimes it's really hard to know where to begin. Should I give you a history lesson about the atrocities Canada has committed against Indigenous peoples? Should I remind you that the number of unmarked graves found outside of residential schools across Turtle Island are now over 10,000? Should I point out that Canada has only completed 11 of the 94 calls to action that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission called for? Instead, I decided to tell you a story. It was the summer of 1964. Elsie Gerbrandt was in her garden in Crystal City, Manitoba, about 40 minutes west of Morden. Elsie's garden was her pride and joy. She loved gardening almost more than anything, and she spent hours diligently weeding and harvesting all throughout the summer. As Elsie worked, a man approached her and introduced himself as the local Indian agent. He asked her if she might be willing to take an Indian child into her home. The woman assumed this child didn't have another home, and Elsie loved children, and she had a huge heart, and she said yes. She would take care of this child who needed a home. There was no screening process. There were no background checks. There were no interviews. Because Elsie met the only requirement that was necessary. She was white. The next day, the Indian agent brought the woman a little girl. And that girl was my mother. What he didn't say was that this girl already had a home. She also had 3 siblings. All 4 of those children were taken away from their parents, separated, sent to live with different families. We don't know where. Because Canada was, and I quote Duncan Campbell Scott here, trying to solve the Indian problem. I'm not going to share more of my mom's story with you because it's hers to tell, but I'm going to tell you what it was like to grow up with a 60s scoop survivor. I spent most of my life feeling like I didn't fit in, desperately wishing that my skin was white so I looked like the people around me. Knowing that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, no matter what clothes I bought, I wasn't going to fit in because something was different, something was wrong, something was missing. I didn't look like them, I didn't feel like them, I didn't have the culture and the traditions and the knowledge of my family that they did. I had this unsettled feeling of not fitting in anywhere. But you know what I did know? I heard things that were said about Indigenous people. I heard about how terrible the culture was, how it wasn't Christian, it was evil, it was dark and dangerous, and I spent most of my life scared to admit who I was. Because I knew what people would think, and if you're really honest with yourself, you know what people would have thought too. So why am I sharing this intensely personal and really painful story with a whole bunch of strangers today? Because today is Truth and Reconciliation Day. People talk so much about wanting reconciliation and making amends and reparations, but they want to skip over the truth part. And before we can get to the reconciliation piece, we have to be willing to sit with and acknowledge the really uncomfortable and difficult and hard things. Things like, maybe Canada hasn't been as diverse and inclusive as they told us they were. Maybe Canada's hidden history from us on purpose. Maybe this isn't a dark chapter in our history. Maybe this isn't our past. Maybe it's our present, because I'm standing here in front of you right now, today. Over my lifetime, and I would venture to guess that every Indigenous person and person of color in this country would concur with me, I have heard the same comments quietly and sometimes not so quietly said over and over and over again. Why can't they just get over it? How many times do we need to apologize? Yeah, it was terrible, but I wasn't there. I didn't have anything to do with it. And one of my personal favorites, we're all human, we're all the same. Can't we all just get along? These questions used to fill me with so much anger and resentment until one day I realized it's not real for them. For non-Indigenous peoples in Canada, these stories aren't real. They're stories. They're pieces of history like John A. Macdonald, the World Wars, and the Titanic. Do you understand that this happened to real people? That those stolen children are real as my mother, as real as the people you pass in the grocery stores, as real as your neighbors, as real as the person in downtown Winnipeg that you're desperately trying to ignore. Every single Indigenous person you meet is tied to residential schools, day schools, or the 60 Scoop in one way or another. These aren't just theories and ideas that we get to argue with over coffee or rant about on social media and then go home and forget about them. These are our lives, our real and lived experiences. That's the truth piece. What about the reconciliation piece? What does that mean? What does that mean for us as individuals and for Morden as a community? The idea of reconciliation depends entirely on being in relationship with each other. Reconciliation is about mutual respect, about honesty, about trust. And if you consider that we need respect, honesty, and trust to build reconciliation, I suspect it might take a while to really get there. Going to a blankets exercise and dutifully reading off a land acknowledgement isn't going to get us there, but those are really good places to start. Just like today is a really good place to start. Listening to hard truths, opening up our hearts and our minds to truly understand is a really good place to start. But please don't stop there. If you're seeking reconciliation, it has to go beyond your orange shirt today. Once Truth and Reconciliation Day is over, what are you really doing to move towards repairing the relationship between Canada and First Nations? I'm not asking what your MLA is doing or what your MP is doing. I'm asking what you're doing. Are you still sitting quietly when someone makes a racist comment or a joke? Are you waiting for someone else to respond so that you don't have to? Are you continuing to educate yourself, to listen, to trying to understand? Can you tell your kids the honest and hard and ugly truth so that we can be sure these mistakes are never repeated? Will you actually read the Truth and Reconciliation report and the calls to action and the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls inquiry? And then, will you demand that your government and your churches take complete and full responsibility for the genocide that they tried to commit? Will you demand clean water, equal funding, accessible health care, full and total reform of the child welfare system? Is it more for you than just wearing an orange shirt today? Do you really, really mean it? Today we have been invited on a healing walk where we will remember every child that's been affected by residential schools. Today I walk with my Indigenous kin and I remember the truths that are finally starting to be heard. We've been saying it for a really, really long time and it's taken Canada a long time to listen. But they're listening now. We walk and we remember and we commit to never, ever forgetting the children who went to school and never came back. And we walk and we remember the ones that returned and had to learn how to live with what they experienced. I walk for the parents whose children were forcefully taken from them, and for the children who lost family, the children who lost love and acceptance and culture and heritage, the children who lost their ability to trust in their own sense of self-worth. I walk for my mother today. I remember the anguished cry that came out of her when she learned that her mother had died. I walk for all the years that we lost. I walk for the grandparents and the aunties and the uncles and the cousins and the family I will never know. I grieve and I remember every lost relationship. I walk in those truths and I remember what Canada and Canada's people and Canada's churches forgot. That every single one of those children mattered. And I walk with you, with each and every one of you who's brave enough to be here today. Wherever you are on your journey to understanding, I commit to walking beside you as you sit in these truths and make the long, hard steps towards reconciliation. Miigwech.